When modern headlines analyze Turkey's foreign policy, they often debate whether the country is experiencing an axis shift. But this assumes Turkey operates on ideological loyalty. In reality, Ankara moves between global powers with a specific calculation, maintaining its own center of gravity in a world of giants. This pattern was forged in the immediate aftermath of World War II. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, began applying immense diplomatic and military pressure on Turkey, demanding joint control over the strategic Turkish straits. Facing an immediate existential threat to its borders, Turkey reacted by swinging its geopolitical pendulum entirely in one direction, seeking the protection of the West. This highlights the harsh physics of geopolitics for a middle-sized state. To guarantee its physical survival, Turkey initially had to sacrifice its strategic autonomy to a single superpower. Entering the 1950s, Ankara merged its national interests with Washington's. Under Prime Minister Adnan Menderes, Turkey positioned itself as the indispensable eastern anchor of the NATO alliance. Gaining this protection required a steep entry fee. Turkey paid it in blood, deploying thousands of soldiers to fight alongside the United States in the Korean War. Simultaneously, Turkish policymakers sought a long-term economic anchor. In 1959, they applied to join the European Economic Community, ensuring their economy would remain competitive with their neighbor and rival, Greece. This absolute reliance on the West held firm until 1964, when intense intercommunal violence broke out on Cyprus. Ankara prepared a military intervention to protect Turkish Cypriots, assuming its NATO allies would offer full support. Instead, U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson sent a blunt, severe letter to Ankara. He warned that if a Turkish intervention provoked a Soviet attack, NATO might choose not to defend Turkey. The Johnson letter taught Turkey a permanent lesson. Leaning exclusively on one superpower strips a nation of its sovereignty the moment national interests diverge. The pendulum had to move. By the late 1960s, Turkish strategists knew they needed leverage against Washington. They actively sought a geopolitical counterweight. The solution was highly pragmatic. Fiercely anti-communist leaders, like Prime Minister Süleyman Demirel, began accepting long-term, low-interest credit from the Soviet Union to build massive heavy industry plants across Turkey. This new strategic autonomy was put to the test in 1974. Following a coup on Cyprus, Turkey launched a massive military operation onto the island, ignoring fierce opposition from the West. The United States immediately responded with a crippling arms embargo. Ankara retaliated on the spot, shutting down key American military bases on Turkish soil. Through this volatile decade, Turkey used its diplomatic ties with Moscow as a shield against American pressure, all while maintaining its seat inside the NATO tent. The geopolitical math reset again at the end of the 1970s. Following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the Iranian Revolution, Washington and Ankara found they desperately needed each other again. Concurrently, the 1980 military coup in Turkey restructured the country's domestic politics in a way that aligned with America's Greenbelt strategy to contain Soviet expansion. Prime Minister Turgut Özal drove this realignment. He replaced the country's closed economic model with neoliberal reforms, locking Turkey into the global market. But while the security pillar with Washington was repaired, the civilizational pillar with Europe fractured. In 1987, the European Economic Community flatly rejected Turkey's membership application, citing severe democratic and human rights deficits. Turkey's three-pillar strategy is a constant, delicate balancing act. Securing one front with the U.S. often means exposing another vulnerability with Europe. Then the Soviet Union dissolved. Panic set in across Ankara. Overnight, Turkey lost its value as NATO's eastern shield against communism. Policymakers executed a rapid strategic pivot, rebranding Turkey to the West as the indispensable role model, a secular, democratic market economy ready to stabilize the newly fractured states of the Middle East and the Caucasus. This strategic positioning paved the way for the 1995 customs union and official EU candidate status in 1999. Turkey outlasted the Cold War by successfully rebranding its geopolitical currency. It effectively replaced its old role as a military buffer with a new one, an economic and cultural bridge. Today, the global system is multipolar. Ankara actively seeks strategic autonomy, expanding its influence and trade across the Balkans, the Middle East, and Asia. When facing friction with the West, Turkey pulls up its classic playbook: inviting Russia and China to the table. This Eastern engagement isn't a permanent departure. It's a calculated tactic to raise Ankara's bargaining power with Washington and Brussels. Modern headlines constantly ask if Turkey's axis is shifting. That question misunderstands how middle-sized states actually operate. The names and eras change, but the logic is constant. Balancing great powers isn't an anomaly for Turkey. It's the permanent, necessary condition for survival.